Show.
And we are live. Everyone, welcome to the Gamification Revolution. I'm your host, Gabe Zickerman. It is a beautiful spring day in New York City. I am excited, and no, Phaedra and I did not previously coordinate our chosen colors of clothing today. I'm joined by our guest, Phaedra Boinodiris. Am I right? Can we say
Yes,
it?
you are correct.
Boom! I love to win. Um, and Phaedra is with us in North Carolina. You guys, so great to have her back on the show, and great to have all of you here with us today. Everybody, I'm so excited that you're with us. It's another great episode of GREV. If you don't already know, if this is your first time, you're going to need a social media account to log in. Click your login button. Join us on Spreecast. You can ask questions. There's already people have asked questions of you, Phaedra, while we have been setting up. And you can come on
Wow.
camera. You can come on camera even and talk to us and ask us questions. This fast-paced 30 minutes. And for those of you who are regulars, welcome back, everybody. Great to see you. And I'm also looking forward to seeing you and and Phaedra and 55 other people or so who are speaking at G Summit coming up in June, 10th through the 13th in San Francisco.
Woo!
It's gsummit.com. And many of you know we announced today that we're adding some very important and very interesting people to the rundown. We've got Michael Wu from Lithium, who many of you know is a well-known data scientist, been working in gamification for a while. We've got folks from X Prize, Virgin Active, and I promised you guys a special thing just for GREV viewers that other people don't know. So I will tell you that today I'm going to give you a little bit of info about something that you don't know, but I'm going to tell you. Many of you know her as one of the leading thinkers on the subject of designing for engagement and designing for community, and certainly one of the original folks from G Summit all the way back when we started in 2011. I'm very pleased to tell just you guys here on Gamification Revolution webinar that Amy Jo Kim will be back and giving a barnstorming lecture on the subject of designing cooperative game-like experiences at G Summit, which is now scheduled for June the 12th, I think her talk is. I'm so excited. Yay! You guys, it's a crazy thing. It's a crazy thing how many awesome people are going to be there. And Phaedra, one of my favorites, and great to have you back. So tell us a little bit, Phaedra. We're going to get to some of the questions that have already queued up in a minute. But so tell us what you're working on right now at IBM. What's so cool? What's getting you really excited?
Well, we just wrapped up our big corporate-wide alternate reality game, which was just a tremendous amount of fun. It lasted over a 3-day period, and we learned a ton from it. It's been a long time since I've gotten that excited about a project. It was really intense.
Can you tell us more about what it was, what you were working on?
Yes. Our CEO really values education, and not just any kind of education, but regular education on topics that are very important to her. And so she established something called Think Friday events. And there was one where she especially wanted us to focus on next generation social business tools. And she wanted all IBMers globally to really be able to get a sense as to the philosophy of why it is important and critical to use next generation social business tools as a means to solve complex problems collaboratively. And so we thought it would be a really neat idea to have experiential learning and actually create an alternate reality game where there's this big mystery, there's this big compelling storyline, and in order to unlock chapters within the story, in order to solve this mystery, in order to share the clues, you're actually using these tools as a means to do so. And so it was a lot of fun because there's 500,000 employees within IBM, and there are in countries all around the world. So we needed to find a story that was interesting enough, compelling enough that people just would want to play. They would want to stay engaged. And we just learned an incredible amount from the experience.
So can you tell us what the story was? It's actually one of the questions that immediately came up. What is this story? How do you author a mystery that really will work for people across the world like that?
Well, I'll tell you, we came up with multiple renditions. Of course, the first time the game designers, we sat in the room and we were thinking about what would be compelling enough. is we thought, there has to be a villain. There has to be an evil entity, evil organization that is, trying to attack the world. And we have to go and collectively come figure out, where is this evil organization? What are their plans? And so we pitched this very intricate storyline to our investors. And they said, nope, too dark. You can't have any bad guys. Come back to the drawing table. So the second time around, we thought, how are we going to come up with something that's compelling enough if there's no bad guys, right? And so we thought maybe if it was around a celebrity, somebody that, or something that all IBMers could really get behind. So we picked Watson, which is the artificial intelligence which we created that competed in Jeopardy against human opponents.
Right.
And for this storyline, we were thinking, okay, what if there's a meteor that's zooming past planet Earth, and when it's at its closest apex, suddenly Watson becomes sentient and starts to talk to the Mars rover and all of these different systems worldwide, and people have to figure out what's going on. And so we told this to our investors, and we're like, what do you think of this idea? And they said, no, you can't use anything real, no real products, no real systems, because it might get leaked to the press and people might misunderstand. So we had to think of something else. So by this time, we're ready to really kick up our heels and really try to think beyond normal boundaries. So we decided to land on a storyline that referred to the next grand challenge. So if you're familiar at all with IBM history, so the first next grand challenge was when we created Deep Blue, which competed against real grand chess masters, right, and won. Yeah. And then the second grand challenge was Watson competing in Jeopardy. So it was always an artificial intelligence competing in some kind of a game. So we're like, oh, this could be interesting. Why not have the next grand challenge where we're introducing a new AI that's competing in an actual multiplayer real-time strategy game, a video game in essence. Okay. If we're going to up the ante on the AI, why not up the ante on the kind of game that this AI is playing against? So we did this very intricate backstory and talking about the gaming engine and the way that the artificial intelligence supports both competitive and collaborative gameplay, how it's a learning AI, and then we created this very intricate, again, backstory with the science and the methodology. And then we started to introduce characters within the game, like the lead artificial intelligence designer, and how she's on her world tour introducing this AI, and suddenly she goes missing. And that's the beginning of the mystery, because the tournament's about to launch, and here's this key person suddenly missing. So it's kind of like a mix of where in the world is Carmen Sandiego, yes, mixed in with IBM history. And so that was basically the premise of the story. And you needed to figure out who is she working with, what kind of project was she working on, where was she in her world tour, and you basically mix clues that are found in an analog fashion, for example, in cafeterias around the world where she had visited, along with materials and clues that were dropped, through the different online social collaboration tools. And it was fascinating. We set up game masters in geographies worldwide that really got into it. They began role playing and really participating in the game. And you could tell that those game masters that got more engaged, more interested in the storyline, more into the role playing, there were actually more people, more employees of IBM actually participating in those geographies than would otherwise not be.
That's a very insight. What was the purpose of the game?
The purpose of the game, again, was twofold. Firstly, to introduce some of the newer things out of research that were focusing on the next generation of social business tools, but more importantly, giving people a taste of how you can use these tools to collectively solve big problems. In this case, a missing person. So, giving people that sense of experiential learning was really, really critical.
So you were talking, you've been using this term investors, which is kind of interesting
Yeah.
because we think of you as being internal to IBM. So can you tell us a little bit more? I guess it's worthwhile to understand a little bit more about the Serious Games group there, and how do you actually interact with the rest of the company? Who are these investors you're talking about?
IBM is a very, very big company. So there's, multiple divisions, many, many groups, many, many people. So when we are approached, the gaming group that I'm in actually focuses and works on the consulting division. So we work on clients, mostly external clients, but we also take on some internal clients as well. And when I say investors, I mean our internal clients. So in this case, it was an internal client who came to us asking us to come up with a clever way of engaging people around the world, again, around those two key points.
So this is so interesting. What did we do before we had you doing serious games like this at IBM? How did we do this? Let's notify the whole company about these new technologies. What are we replacing, or is this something completely new?
Well, most of the time, the training that is done via our Think Friday events is through webinars, through discussion forums, through videos, similar to like what you're doing with the Gamification Summit and some of these materials now. Uh, we thought it would be a good idea to introduce an alternate reality game because we wanted people to get a sense as to actually solving something together using this kind of a gameplay instead of watching a webinar about why is social business really important and why can it help you solve big problems. Why not actually do it in a fun and safe and engaging way?
So was this a piece of software, or was this a physical world ARG that people played?
It wasn't a piece of software. It was simply we planted clues throughout a wide variety of different social business tools, whether it was our internal crowdsourcing tool or our community forums, whatever the case might be. And we also embedded videos, of the key characters, actors and actresses who would be playing, webcasts that, where they would be speaking, in podcasts where they'd be talking about who she met on her world tour. So these kinds of things were implanted. So that's in the digital realm. And then in the analog realm, there were also clues that were planted in cafeterias around the world. So, for example, in Australia and in Hungary, we planted clues. So you would need to, if you found out online that there was a key clue in Sydney, Australia, in the cafeteria there, you'd have to go and find out, okay, who within my network is there that can go with their mobile phone, take a picture of the clue and upload it to the rest of the community. So it gave people a sense of community, sharing information, collaborating in order to unlock the next day's chapter.
So, I love this. This sounds amazing. How do you convince an organization to invest the amount of energy and resources required to do what you just described? Don't you get people in these meetings saying to you like, "Oh, hey, Phaedra, that sounds really cool, but why don't we just make a video?"
Well, I think if you look online and you see some of the business use cases for when alternate reality games and when other forms of experiential learning was well executed, what you'll find is, just as we did, that the statistics show that the amount of engagement, not just the number of people, the amount of traffic to the websites went up, but also that because people were actually doing, because they were actually solving a problem, because they actually had to update their profiles, reach out to their friends in Sydney, they had to do all of these things, the philosophy started to change, right? So they started to end up using these tools more and more and more after that experience.
So over the years, you've done a whole bunch of these things, and we have a really interesting question from Seamus, who's a regular participant here in the webinar, which is about how the outcome or the views of outcomes have shifted from the time you started to now. And I think Seamus is asking about this project, but I'm also curious about from when you started actually working at IBM to now, how have expectations changed over time, given the amazing things that you've accomplished there, like the city manager and innovate and all this kind of cool stuff?
You know, it's interesting. It's like you've heard of the pendulum swinging. So when I first joined, it was much more difficult. The environment was much more difficult. I was constantly hearing, and I'm not just saying within IBM, but across the domain, right? Whether internal IBM or external IBM, um, that games are for kids, and that there's a stigma associated with games, and this isn't really serious, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like we've all heard and seen.
Sure.
But now it's almost like the pendulum has swung so much in the other direction that people are making the assumption that games are the panacea for everything. And not only that, but they're really, really cheap. Like
Oh,
somehow they're
right.
cheaper than software, other forms of software, which is I find just bizarre.
Sure.
So it's interesting. People think it's easy, cheap, and will solve everything. So it's kind of this strange shift of the pendulum. And so we're working to try and get up set expectations right with regards to what we have found that they're really good at and what kinds of problems they can solve.
It's interesting. I want to dig into that because it's making me think about a client we work on my consulting practice, who comes and says they want to do a project, this financial literacy related project, and they say they've got an idea and they've been workshopping an idea internally. And can we help you? Can we help them? And I say, cool. Let me see your ideas. Right? We got a process. We want to think everything through. And they come and they show me literally something that looks like, if you can really imagine this, something that's like Call of Duty, the finance version. And as their kind of sketch, right? And I think to myself, this is such an interesting observation that you're making. How do you help people pull back from that? How do you explain to your internal partners? How do you talk about how do we use the right kind of game for the right setting? What's the right level of gaminess, let's say, that's
So
appropriate?
I've got this 5-step approach that has been my Bible for anything associated with this topic. The first step is always to talk about the business case. So what is the return on investment, right? So what are the metrics that you need to show when this game is done such that it will unlock further investment? And you've got to start there. You can't have that be the last thing that you do. You've got to start there because it will affect everything. The second thing you need to do is document what are the learning points, or what are the kinds of things you need to convey via this game or via this experience in as much detail as possible. Then you've got to determine, as the third step, what is fun about what you're trying to convey, or what is fun about what you're trying to teach. With that third step, it's actually the hardest step because you've got to start to match the right kinds of puzzles, the right kinds of experiences to match what you're trying to convey. And if you get that step wrong, you end up with what I call chocolate covered broccoli, right? Which is like Gears of War to teach database administration. It's
Right.
completely unmatched. So when you've got that third step done, if you and you've matched the right puzzles and the right experience to what you're trying to teach, then you can start determining the game genre, right? Is it more of a strategy game? Is it more of a sim style game? What is it? You can have a hybrid of genres. And then the last one, you've got to really think hard about your platform. You've got to determine, where is my audience going to play this? How much time will they have to play this? Let's talk about the gaming engine platform. How often do I have to change the content within this game to keep it viable, right?
Right.
What is motivating my audience to play? Is the culture within the organization set up such that my people will actually be encouraged to play or feel that it's safe to play? Because even if you make the best game in the world, if you don't have the marketing behind it, if you don't have the organizational support, you can just
Right.
forget
People
it.
won't
Who's
play
going to
it.
play it?
So
Right.
just briefly, I think it's amazing, and I remember that we've talked about these 5 points before, and I think they're so amazing, and they bring so much clarity to this discussion. So Mike is wondering, kind of from the chat, what was the metric used to measure success in this project? And I want to add to this question for you about the metrics. I want to say playtime. You mentioned daily, so it sounds like you were breaking this thing up over a long period of time. Can you talk about that design decision also?
Yes, yes. So we actually wanted this to only be 3 days. So marketing was really key. We wanted to drive people to the game. And we thought, okay, IBMers are really busy. They're only going to devote 15 minutes, 20 minutes max to actually diving in, finding these clues, uploading the clues, and then watching the next chapter of the story the next day. And the mistake that we made was that we underestimated the voracious appetite of IBMers. So we actually had a subset of people who, no matter how simple we thought the clues were, they thought, no, 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 this is way too simple. There's got to be something in here about this character time jumping and going back in time and forward in time. They were whipping out their cryptography algorithms, trying to find the underlying story behind the story. And it was just next time we do this, we'll make the story more deep for at least that subset of people who want more meat, to dig into. With regards to the success metrics, a couple of things that we looked at was how many more people ended up joining really critical communities that were very, very important, all right, to the investors. Another one was we gauged social sentiment throughout the gameplay. So what were people saying about our next generation crowdfunding tool, or what were the conversations around using a game for experiential learning? So we were gauging and watching exactly what people were saying. Were they positive sentiments? Were they negative sentiments? How many people were changing or updating their profiles in order to play? From which divisions were people coming? What rank were they? Were they top executives playing? Were they new hires? All of these things help to create a level of metrics that we provided post gameplay.
So you always tie, this is such a granular question, but do you always tie into kind of the authentication services at IBM? So people are always logging in with their IBM ID to play anytime you build an internal game?
We did it, yes, because for us it's important to be able to know information about our player, because we need to, in order to go back and unlock more investment, you need to be able to show information about who is playing and how are they changing their habits post gameplay. It's really, really important to keep track of that information.
I don't want to come back to that actually, but and thanks for those questions, by the way, Mike and Rini, about metrics. So there's a question from Marcel Leal. Thanks for this question, Marcel. It's about infinite versus finite games, I guess, ultimately extensions of an idea and the continuing, provision of content for an idea. Can you talk a little bit about when you're designing these kinds of experiences for IBM, do you always think about finite periods? How do you plan for content extension for the future? And especially given this sort of rabid fan energy that's in the game, what do you do with those people if you can't service them right now because you don't have the resources or the time to give them what they really want?
The interesting thing about alternate reality games is you can really quickly get a sense as to who your champions are, right? Who are your top innovators? Who are the ones who really who you really need to tap as ambassadors next time you pull off one of these things, right? Because they're the ones who are, blasting out over social media, here's what's going on, and here's the clue I found, and just getting really, really into it. So keeping track of these people so that next time you roll it out is absolutely key. For this one, for this game, it was a closed game. So not only do I mean that in the sense of it being internal IBM only, but additionally, it wasn't open-ended. It only, lasted a few days, and then, the mystery ends. She is found. There were branching parts of the storyline. So depending on what kinds of answers people found, right, we branched it a certain way. But doing something more open-ended is tricky, mainly because it takes a lot of resources. It takes a lot of people to pull off something like this. You've got to keep them engaged. You've got to keep these game masters on the hook, and people live very busy lives. One concern of ours was because this was successful, and because this created so much buzz, is this something that people are going to want to do every month now, and then we'll have alternate reality game burnout? So there has to be some level of a balance as to when you do some of these things, and again, not treating it as the panacea for everything.
So just briefly, because it came up, how do you allocate, actually, it's a question from Dutch in chat, which is really about resource allocation, but I want to make this kind of broader and more applicable. When you're thinking about planning these kinds of games out, Phaedra, what percentage of the resources do you allocate to design, running the thing, and then the
Yeah.
kind of post-mortem analysis? How do you divide up your resources?
Well, this one we really only had 3 months to pull it off. So we needed to make a story. Again, if I had done it next time I do it, I'd love to have more fun, more time, so I could make the storyline richer and deeper. Because with only 3 months, there's only so many clues you can plant, and so many people you can line up in time. But again, it really depends on the level of richness you want it to be, and how many days and how much time you expect your employees to devote to something like this. It's a unique genre of gameplay. It is not, again, the end all be all. There's so many other things companies can do to engage employees. This is just one arrow in the quiver that can be used. I like to use it whenever there's, especially if you've got a big in-person meeting, and you can do an alternate reality game leading up to an in-person meeting in order to get a big message across. If you want to drop a bomb, for example, to shake up the organization for some kind of a culture change, if you want people to adopt something, this could be a clever mechanism to do it. Again, it's not for everything, but for some things it can be really quite effective.
So last couple of questions. This one from Sarah McManus. Thanks, Sarah, for asking this one. And the real question is about translation. She's asking about data aggregation with executives, but I want to make this a bigger question. You speak the language of game design, serious games, gamification, changing people's behaviors and attitudes through the power of games. Your executive management team speaks the language of finance. They speak the language of operations. They speak the language of managing a really big company who's got a whole bunch of diverse business units, who's got a whole bunch of goals, bottom line thinking, all that. How do you translate? How do you translate what you're accomplishing into the language of this kind of dry, sort of, or maybe not dry, but more structured kind of corporate language? How do you explain to them what you're really doing here?
As I said before, the very first step is always, always, always start with a business use case. What is the return on investment? When it comes to employees, right? If you're talking about employee engagement, the average tenure for an employee in the US today is 1.5 years, right? There have been studies that have shown that over 70% of employees have completely checked out. They just don't care. They don't care about their job, 70%. Imagine what that means to productivity, right? So, you can start off there with a business use case for doing things for employee engagement. Then there's all kinds of statistics which talk about retention of knowledge using experiential learning. Additionally, more and more use cases to show that serious games, gamification as a means to drive customer behavior, customer loyalty, customer adoption, when well executed, is really taking off speed. So again, start with the use cases. Start off with the business lingo, right?
Well,
Here's why you should care about this.
right.
And these old mechanisms are old. They don't speak to the digital native. Everybody's got, their mobile devices, and we're hooked in digitally, and, we're doing 20 things at the same time. How do you ratchet up to a new level of engagement when you speak to both your customer as well as your employee?
So just briefly on this, because I'm fascinated by it. In your job, the Phaedra job, what percentage of your time do you spend selling management, and what percentage of your time, do you spend designing, executing, maintaining things?
Actually, very little of my time is devoted towards internal clients anymore. Right now, I'm focused, I would say, 98% of my time externally. Um, one of the big projects, or one of the big solutions that I'm most excited about is how is it that gamification can be leveraged in the realm of HR? So, for example, gamified talent management, if you can use concepts from role-playing games as a means to give people a sense of self-direction within organizations. I love this concept. We've got some really cool things going on there. But additionally, when it pertains to changing people's behaviors, if the more you know about the player, the more you've assessed, the more information you've gathered, the more data points you know about who this person is, what motivates them, what their personality types are, what skill sets they have, now you can custom curate experiences for them, giving it to them where they are, right, via their mobile device, sending them micro quests on a daily basis so that you can start to move or change their behavior over time.
Right.
And the real trick to pull off something like this, again, always thinking about that 5-step rule. If you've got to always prove your success metrics, either one of these things must be integrated into the legacy systems. In other words, it must be transparent into their work environment.
Right. Not
So
something
as
separate.
their user, yes, not separate. So as their user behavior changes over time, it's directly integrated, for example, in a CRM system. So the game will know what client is this person currently working on, what is their back history, what's their performance assessment look like, and now the experience is tailored to them.
So one last question. That's awesome. I agree with you 1,000%. One last question for you, actually. It's fascinating. We could spend all day talking. Tiago's been waiting to have this question answered for quite some time, and I want to know your thoughts on this specifically. You've seen it. How is it different doing this kind of stuff for high skill workers? Like, I know that IBM is a high skill environment, right? In general, as a general rule, they're mostly touching that, but you're also working with external customers who probably have more frontline employees. What are the big differences between high skilled employees and low skilled employees, or executives and line employees, as it relates to building and designing these experiences?
It's a very good question. What I can tell you is some of the things that Dan Pink said in his book Drive. And I don't think that there's necessarily a huge difference between what motivates people at the executive level and in the lower ranks of an organization, because Dan Pink says, organizational behavioral psychologist, for those who may not have heard of him, he says that if you think about the eras of long ago, right, the agrarian era and the industrial era, what motivated us as humans was the carrot and the stick, right? If you don't plow this land, your family's going to wither and die. But he says the knowledge worker of today, whether you're up the executive chain or whether you're at the lower ranks, what we're motivated by universally is a sense of self-direction. And he talks more about the sense of self-direction residing on 3 major tenets. He talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And actually, I've used this as my guideline with anything associated with employee engagement, and not just employee engagement, but customer engagement too. If you can really think about, does what I'm doing, does this experience I'm creating give this person a sense of self-direction? Do they know who they are and where they're going and how they're contributing through this experience? This I have found really to have kicked up the whole conversation a notch. It has evolved the conversation a notch, and I found it very, very useful as a framework.
I love that. It's very, very good to have those frameworks to be able to convey those things to people. So, Phaedra, thank you so much for being with us today. It's always
My
amazing to see you.
pleasure.
So fascinating,
Oh,
just an amazing
likewise.
chat. Folks can follow you on Twitter at Innov8, the number 8 game, right? Anything, and they should check out the
Yes.
IBM Serious Games group. We put the link up there before, and we'll see you at G Summit, obviously in June, right? Anything else folks should
Thank you.
do?
Yes. And I do have a new book that is out called Serious Games for Business. So please do check it out. I actually should hold it up and show you guys, but it is for sale on
Yeah.
Amazon, and I will be bringing it to the summit.
Yay! Serious Games for Business by Phaedra Boinodiris. Oh my God, Phaedra, I gotta get your name right every time. Boinodiris.
Sorry, I'm used to it.
Yeah, but hopefully I'm doing
Thank
well.
you.
I'm at least. Thank you for being here. Thanks all of you for joining us on the Gamification Revolution. I'm your host, Gabe Zickerman. You can follow me on Twitter at @gzickerm, and we'll see you all next week in another episode. In the meantime, keep having fun, y'all.
Thank you.